Even after a couple trailers, you might be asking yourself, what is the Gunk? And after 7+ hours of playing it, I can solidly answer that by saying not much. The SteamWorld games have highlighted Image and Form as a premier developer of games. Their combination of art, complex gameplay, and unique characters offered something that, at least to me, was truly unique. So when they announced they're working on a game called The Gunk, I thought to myself, sure, I'll buy it. Is the Gunk some diamond in the rough? The sheen of the Image and Form's reflection of excellent gameplay, bouncing off the weird-ass, squeezed-out crotch juices that you siphon up in the game? Or is it visiting family on the holidays, where you show up all excited, then everyone watches the same parade they've watched for the last 20 years, except here it's just the same cyclic gameplay over and over again. The Gunk's a 3D platformer action-adventure game about two miners who've landed on a planet choking on the bubbling mixture that looks like a cross between oil and the side of a toilet that hasn't been flushed after a beer piss. Image and Form have published this via Thunderful, and it's exclusive to the Xbox and the PC, with Gamepass as well. Make sure to hit subscribe and the all button for the notifications for continued previews and reviews from me. Graphically, especially when you start out this game, you end up in this land of underwater-looking overworlds, and originally the lack of a map frustrated me a ton in this game. However, as I continued to explore the underworld and overworld, I started to realize that while there isn't a lot of visual mapping that you can do in this title, picking out the different platforms and locations you need to go isn't that difficult because it is really basic. As I continued to play it, I started to dig the style choice, though. That flora and fauna system that's really closer to coral reefs, well, at least the ones we haven't killed yet, that you might see while scuba diving, and awesome, almost cartoonist, thick kind of grass that actually leads to a much better representation of alien plant life than we've seen in other high-end games. The game does have a generally basic, low-budget feel to it, though, with wide character lines and blockish faces and a cartoony feel to the main characters, their spaceship, and anybody that you meet. Nevertheless, traveling through the biomes in the game is not without the occasional standout and outstanding moment. It's just not that often because the world isn't really varied, especially for an alien planet. Most of it looks like a park in a central city with a couple spots to go and unlock, and then boom, you're back at it again, while the Gunk looks, well, sort of like Gunk should look. Nothing ever really looks incredible in this game. Where still, you might like Ren and Stimpy, or you might not, but you recognize the style, or South Park, or Adventure Time, or many other cartoons or animes. Something about the Gunk looks like its namesake, a generic term that doesn't sway one way or the other and makes defining it as anything other than expected very difficult. Performance-wise, the game is really solid, and it probably should be, because it's not necessarily doing a ton, without any real drops in the FPS, and, well, it's not open world, it's more open section. After each load, the FPS stays very solid, without any major drops that we sometimes see in games after they load a section here or there. But what you start to feel as you're playing the game is that graphically, it represents the game itself, a very average kind of title that doesn't do anything above or below what you really expect. Sure, the performance is solid, but what it's performing and delivering to you isn't necessarily anything other than solid.
I'm heading back to camp.
Finally! You should find a good spot for putting down a signal beacon. Maybe over by the statue. It'll make it easier for you when you want to return there later.
And this continues in the audio department. Randy and Beck are the two characters. They banter back and forth, but most of the time one of them is just saying, "This is amazing," and the other one's saying, "This is dangerous," and that continues throughout almost the entirety of the game. The development that does happen a bit later in the third or maybe last 1/4 of the game is interesting, but nothing that's going to make you sit up and beg for buttermilk. It's like listening to a parent and a kid at a questionable bungee jump when they're going back and forth as well with each other. You return back to the base, you say one or two things to them, and then you just go back and start traveling again. But as you traverse, the environments also don't allow for a lot of different sound effects, especially because you don't really have a lot of things to interact with. There's environmental sounds. They do a good job. They pop above that din of wind and sound as you're jumping around, but it's pretty rare to see anything that's extraordinary. What is here when it comes to the sounds is okay, but explosions, the moving of puzzle parts, and the growing of vegetables that you place in specific spots to grow ladders and steps doesn't do a lot not for the whole presentation. They're not thick or varied in the way that you might expect with some sound samples in other games, especially a game like this. Musically, it's the same way. I dig the classical style of the music, but it's laid back almost as much as the game. It's almost nonsensical in showing up. When it does, it sounds sort of cool for a second, and then the strings fade away and you're back with the wind again. It is very true. In some games, that lean music presentation can work to elevate the moments it arrives in, and by audibly floating above the rest, it's going to indicate this moment of specialness or this part that's monumentally unique. But with the Gunk, there are times where it legitimately sounds like it's just the same track playing, even if it's a good track. And that brings us to gameplay. The Gunk is an exploration game, much less a puzzle game, or an action game, or a third-person shooting game, and I'm going to get to that in a moment. Randy and her partner, Beck, land on a planet overfilling with a toxic black sludge they call the Gunk. No wonder they don't have any cash either, because both of them can't pay attention to anything longer than like 5 seconds. One of the characters leaps off of the ship, goes out and starts to investigate, sees a deer, and, well, that's pretty much it. And now you're off and running. And you find out that this nasty Gunk has corrupted a bunch of the land. All you need to do is suck it out of the land, and it ends up growing vegetation back almost instantly. You travel the world, platforming around, unlocking locked areas, cleaning out platforms, and different paths to find new locations and paths to move forward. The controls, they're fairly basic. One button scans the world, and if the items can be used for crafting or have something interesting about them, you gather that data into your encyclopedia. The other button sucks, and another ends up shooting a weapon if you have it, which isn't as much as a weapon as it is a long-range key that's perfectly timed with energy releases that luckily trigger ancient alien doors. When sucking up the Gunk, you have 2 types, the basic and the advanced. The basic amount of suck is a good amount, but it's pretty wide. And then you can sort of aim in and have a little bit more range, but it sucks a lot less Gunk. Scanning occasional creatures and vegetation to craft upgrades continues to happen throughout the game, and those upgrades can be things like the weapon or more shields or some way to defend yourself or traps. But somehow, no matter what you're doing, none of that becomes fun. And you'd think with the word sucking in it, it'd universally be in some way enjoyable, but you're just sort of there, sucking it all. And then the machine is like, whoa, let's look at this place first. You stop for a second, you look around, and then you begin sucking out the Gunk again. You may think you'll be running around, saving the world from sentient gear grease, exploring these alien worlds, consistently being presented with an ever-deepening mystery. But you're not really. At the starting, for whatever reason, suddenly trying to make you feel bad by saying it could possibly be humans, even though this is the first time humans showed up in the world, which is really weird. Other than those gameplay moments, there isn't much to the game even as you get further into it. You're basically moving around the platforms, unlocking this spoilage by either cleaning out the Gunk or opening doors and then just moving on to the next spot. And did it sound like I just sort of repeated myself? That's how the game feels, like it's always sort of repeating itself. Instead of really elevating this to a very high puzzle-like factor, it's very, very shallow. A to B to C, and if B is clogged, A to C to unlock B. That's it. And then you go into the next section by walking into a tunnel, it loads up, and it loads you to a new place. Sometimes you teleport back to create new items. And it sounds like it is. The problem is the gameplay in this game is about as engaging as clicking OK after reading a website warning about cookies to track you, and at least they sound sweet. Here, you're running around, you're vacuuming up this alien sewage with a portable Dyson, and occasionally you're reminded by your partner how amazing it is or how dangerous it is, depending on which one's talking, and pretty much it. It's almost confusing in how little the game actually really does. Even later on, as more animals and locations branch out around you, it never once causes you to think, which is very odd, especially as easy as the platforming and exploration is. And does all of that impact fun factor? Yes. Imagine if you thought your parents were getting you Legend of Zelda, but they bought you Alekine's gun instead, or maybe even just Biomutant. That's pretty much what you get here. Even if you did like Biomutant, I think you can all agree it's probably not to the level of A Legend of Zelda. This is a solid game. It's not bad. It's just bland, which in a way is in and of itself sort of a dire statement. If it was good or bad, there'd be things to push and pull against. It's bowling with bumpers as a video game. So as you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for a sale, rent, or never touch it again rating system. This is solidly Gamepass or deep sale. It's solid when it comes to its presentation. It didn't crash at all, but I almost sort of wish it did, because at least then we could bitch about something. It's popcorn if the popcorn was somehow diet and also carb-free and tasted like cardboard that was just really depressed. It can look good. Like I said, never crashed, but it never really did anything Other than that, if you like your exploratory walking simulators, this might be a game for you, but do not expect to be challenged in any real way by anything it offers. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked the review. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. This is the place for reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap of any kind. Check out the Patreon. It absolutely helps the channel. Peace out. Stay tuned for more videos from me, previews and reviews as we come up into December and into January. And of course, the big month, February.